Okay, so today we are looking at loyalty. And just to get us started off, I will read one verse from Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6. So this is yet another adornment. I think a number of the adornments that we have looked at, we've said that they are not for us. So you adorning this adornment or this virtue is not necessarily for you. It doesn't necessarily benefit you directly, but then it often benefits others. So loyalty is one of those adornments that it's not for you, but then it's for others, because typically you can't be loyal to yourself. You would be loyal to somebody else. You'd be loyal to another cause. You'd be loyal to another set of beliefs or something like that. So when we read Proverbs chapter 20, verse 6, it says that most men will proclaim everyone his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find? Most men will proclaim everyone his own goodness, but a faithful man who can find? So it means that you can say that you are good. You can say you are all these things. You can call yourself loyal if you want, but actually it comes down to someone else finding you loyal, someone else finding you faithful or loyal. That actually validates whether you truly are loyal or not. And to start us off, I want us to also discuss some examples. So we are trying to define loyalty right now. And so let's discuss what are some examples of loyalty that we find in the Bible. Please share what you think of. What are some of the examples of loyalty that we see in the Bible? Yasby, are you saying something? I can't hear you.
No, not yet. I'm just thinking.
Okay.
I don't know whether you can start.
Sure. So I think one very prominent example of loyalty that we have is Ruth. So Ruth was one of the virtuous women that we looked at when we started for our very first series of Teatime with the Holy Spirit, the Virtuous Woman series. Ruth devoted her whole life to serving her mother-in-law. I believe it was also in honor of her husband who had passed, but she devoted her whole life to serving her mother-in-law. She was still young at that time, based on what her mother-in-law said, that she should go back so that she can find a new husband and all of that. So it means she was still relatively young when her husband passed on. She was still relatively young when Naomi decided to go back to her people. But Ruth, having that quality of loyalty, remaining loyal to her husband, remained loyal to her mother-in-law, even though that husband who connected her and her mother-in-law was passed, she still remained loyal. And that virtue of loyalty was seen by everybody. When she met Boaz, who was supposed to become her husband, Boaz himself testified that the people recognize that you're a virtuous woman. The people recognize what you have done for your mother-in-law. And so Ruth is a very prominent example of loyalty. She stayed with her mother-in-law. Ruth chapter 1, verse 16 to 17, it says, Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And this is so beautiful, because this is literally the vows that we usually hear at weddings, right? that nothing but death will separate the two. And when it comes to human terms, marriage is the most binding covenant that we know of in between humans. And so for Ruth to make such a covenant with her mother-in-law without any kind of, without being bound to do it or without even having to do so, that speaks a lot to the kind of character that Ruth had. And so that's one major example of loyalty that we have in the Bible. Yasvi, do you have another one now?
I think Jacob.
Did you say Jacob?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he was also loyal to Laban. Because recently I was reading a story, and when it was time for him to leave, he got up with his two wives and all the things God had blessed him with. But it got to a point Laban pursued him. When you read Genesis 31, verse 38, that was where Jacob said, "For 20 years I have been with you, caring for your flocks. All that time, your sheep and goats never miscarried. In all those years, I never used a single ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, I never showed you the carcass and asked you to reduce the count of the flock. No, I took the loss myself. You made me pay for every stolen animal, whether it was taken in broad daylight or in dark." It goes on and on and on, but I think that even God testified about Jacob when Laban tried to pursue him. I think the day before, God revealed himself to Laban, warning him that he should not touch Jacob, because if he touches him, uh, he wouldn't take it. Yeah. So I think one thing we can also learn, or thing we can learn from loyalty, is that Jacob didn't look out to Laban all the years he stayed with him and worked tirelessly for him. Yeah. So I think one example we can also learn.
Okay. Yeah, that's also a good example of when the other person is not reciprocating. Right? The Ruth example and a few of the other examples that I would share as well. You see that the other person is also reciprocating, but like you said, with Jacob, Laban was actually taking advantage of Jacob and wasn't treating him the way he should have been treating him. Another example, I believe, of loyalty in the Bible is Jonathan. So Jonathan and David are a unique example of friendship or brotherly love. And when we read 1 Samuel chapter 18, it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. So it's like there was a connection between Jonathan and David that could not be broken. It says Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And then again, it says Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. Mind you, Jonathan was a prince. He was the son of the king. He was, quote unquote, in training to take over the kingdom. And yet it says here that he stripped himself of his robe, his royal robes, and he gave it to David, who at that point in time was a nobody, in quotes, even though we all know that the Lord had seen him and was anointing him to take over from Saul. But David, at this point in time, in the grand story of things, was, in quotes, a nobody. And yet Jonathan was so drawn to him, Jonathan was so connected to him, that he more or less stripped himself, physically stripped himself, and gave everything he had to David. So Jonathan exhibited also another level of loyalty that is quite impressive. He gave to David. He loved him for no reason. And the good thing is that in this case, David never betrayed him, because David could have easily taken advantage of Jonathan's loyalty. David could have easily used it for some kind of malicious things if he had his own agenda. But fortunately, David was a man who feared God, and he didn't do that. But I also feel like even if David had betrayed Jonathan, I don't think Jonathan would have retaliated or anything like that, based on what it is that we've read from what we just read from 1 Samuel chapter 18. It's so powerful that this is the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Another example we also have is John the Beloved. So John the Apostle, the disciple of Jesus Christ. When we read the story of Jesus, we see over and over again where it says that he was the apostle, or he was a disciple whom Jesus loved, or he called himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. And it also says that he was the one who was, I've forgotten the exact expression, but he was the one leaning against the chest, or leaning in the bosom of Jesus Christ. And it wasn't just for the fun of it. We see him actually demonstrating his loyalty for Jesus when he follows him all the way to the cross. And this was a time when many of the disciples had been scattered after Jesus was arrested. But John was right there and followed Jesus all the way to the cross. When we read John chapter 19, verse 25 to 27, it says, "Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciples standing by, whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Woman, behold your son. Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home." I love this so much because, first of all, he has already shown his loyalty by following Jesus all the way to the cross. But secondly, Jesus leaves him with a responsibility, and a great responsibility at that, a responsibility to take care of his mother. And it's not that John did not have a mother. John did have a mother. And I believe John's mother was alive. John's mother was Salome. So John's parents, Zebedee and Salome, were both alive. And so it's not that John didn't have any responsibility, like any responsibility towards his parents or anything like that. But he still took Jesus's mother into his own home, and she mothered him from that moment on. Based on his loyalty again to Jesus, he took on this responsibility. And so I believe that John is another example of loyalty in the Bible. We are still defining loyalty. We haven't quite defined it yet, but we are still just using these examples to kind of tease out what are the features of loyalty. What does it mean when you say that someone is loyal? Maybe one more example that I will give is Uriah. And Uriah is a bit of a different example. Uriah the Hittite was a member of David's army. And he was the husband to Bathsheba, who later became David's wife and the mother of Solomon. And when we read the story in 2 Samuel, it tells us that after David had slept with Bathsheba and she had gotten pregnant, David was trying to find ways and means to cover up what he had done. And so he went and called Uriah to come home. He was hoping that Uriah would go home and sleep with his wife, and then it would be covered up. It would be like, oh, Bathsheba got pregnant from sleeping with her own husband. But then it says in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 9 to 11, And it's so unfortunate because this man's loyalty is what ended up killing him. It says, but Uriah slept. So this is after David had sent Uriah home. It says, but Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down unto his house, David said unto Uriah, camest thou not from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down into thine own house? And Uriah said unto David, the ark and Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. And so Uriah honored David so much, and he was so loyal to David and to the land of Israel, even though he was not a member of the household of Israel. He was so loyal to the household of Israel that even when he had the opportunity during a war, when he was supposed to be fighting, and the king himself called him back, the king himself gave him a luxury that he knew his comrades did not have at that point in time, he refused it. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that, because he felt it would be dishonor. And so Uriah was so loyal to the point that he would not put himself, or he would not allow himself luxury when he knew that his responsibility was elsewhere. And secondly, when you read on throughout the story, you see that in the end, David had to send Uriah away carrying his own death sentence or his own death warrant. The letter he carried was the same letter instructing Joab to put him in a location where he will be killed in battle. And he was, again, so loyal that he did not read the letter. I know so many people who you would send them with something like that, and by the time before they get there, they've opened it to see what's inside. And if Uriah had opened it to see what was inside, he would have known that the king was after his life, and maybe he would have spared his life. But he was so loyal. He thought the best of the king, and he thought the best of the Israelites, that he never thought that something like that would happen. But in any case, this also shows us what it means, an example of loyalty and the extent to which loyalty can go. Is there any other example of loyalty that you can think of in the Bible? Okay, Yasmin, I was asking if there's any example of loyalty that you can think of in the Bible, if you're able to speak. If not, I will just keep going. So, based on these examples that we've given, based on...
You can continue. My network is quite poor.
Okay, no problem. So based on the examples that we've given, Jacob, Ruth, John the Beloved, Jonathan, Uriah, and then if we even think about loyalty towards God, we can also think of David himself. We can think of the 3 Hebrew boys. We can think of Daniel, people who defied all odds just to stay true to what God had called them to do. And so, based on these examples, we can see that loyalty is a virtue that makes you remain faithful to a person, to a belief, to a system, and it makes you so steadfast. It makes you unwilling to waver. It makes you unwilling to leave that person. It makes you unwilling to leave that system. Not only does it keep you in the company or in the presence of that person, but it also compels you to give to that person. So we saw Ruth and the fact that she gave everything to Naomi. She was her whole vision was to make sure that Naomi was taken care of. And we saw Jonathan, that he literally stripped himself of everything that he had and gave it to David. And so loyalty is faithful, loyalty gives, or loyalty also loves. And we'll look at some of the words that are translated as loyalty in a little bit. Yes, so loyalty gives and sacrifices, loyalty remains faithful as well. And then with even the example that you gave of Jacob, it tells us that loyalty, even in the face of challenges, remains steadfast. Loyalty is not easily moved. Because certainly in every relationship, certainly in every in every relationship, there will be moments when, especially if it's a human to human relationship, there'll be moments when you feel like this person is not treating me right, this person is not being fair, whatever is happening, it's not in my best interest, right? And so in those moments, it's easy to rather be disloyal, it's easy to walk away from the relationship or to no longer have the best interest of the person at heart. So going to the Bible and looking at the words that are translated as loyalty. So actually, interestingly, there's no mention of loyalty itself in the loyal or loyalty, either ways, in the King James Version. But then there are some words in the King James that in other versions, like the New King James Version, the ESV, and all of those things, are translated as loyalty. And one of those words is perfect. Perfect. And it's often used in reference to the heart. So in the Old Testament, you see a lot of the times when God talks about having a perfect heart. In other translations, that's also usually translated as having or walking in loyalty, being loyal to the Lord. And the word there is shalem, which is complete, whole, made ready. So let's look at two examples of verses like that. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 61. Here, this is being said to Solomon, I believe. It says, "Let your heart therefore be perfect with the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments as at this day." So the word perfect there, in other translations, you see it as loyal, to be loyal to the Lord, right? And like I said, the word that is translated there is about completeness, is about wholeness, is about being made ready. So it indicates this complete dedication, this whole allegiance to the Lord in this case. So if you are going to be loyal to the Lord, you are going to be wholly and completely dedicated and devoted to him, not willing to step back, not willing to waver, regardless of what happens in life. 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 3. Hezekiah is speaking here. King Hezekiah is speaking. I believe this is after he had been told to put his house in order because the Lord was going to take him away. He went back to God and he said, "I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I have walked before thee in truth and with a perfect heart, and have done that which is good in thy sight." And Hezekiah wept sore. And so Hezekiah was reminding the Lord that, "Lord, I've been loyal. Lord, I've been faithful. I have done all that you have asked me to do." He says, "I have done that which is good in your sight." And so Hezekiah also is indicating that he had demonstrated loyalty to the Lord. And in saying that, he says, "I have walked before thee in truth." And he says, "I have done that which is good in thy sight." So loyalty requires faithfulness. Loyalty requires steadfastness. Loyalty requires not backing down in situations which are difficult. Another word that is also translated as loyal or loyalty is kindness. And that word is hesed, which is goodness or faithfulness. So we'll look at 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 8. Oh no, let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 17. So this is when David had sent Hushai back to Absalom. So remember, when David was fleeing the kingdom because of Absalom, one of his friends, his trusted counselors, who was supposed to be loyal, Ahithophel, he actually went and followed Absalom. So he was disloyal in the end. But then David intentionally sent back Hushai, who was actually remaining loyal to David, back to Absalom so that he would counter the advice of Ahithophel and frustrate the plans of Absalom. And so when Hushai went back to Absalom asked him, this is 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 17. Absalom asked him, "Is this thy kindness to thy friend? Why wentest thou not with thy friend?" In reference to David. And the word kindness there, like I said, is hesed, and it means goodness or faithfulness. And in other translations, you see it saying that, is this the loyalty, or is this how you show loyalty to your friend? And so by turning, and the indication there is that by turning away from David, by deserting David in a moment when he needed him the most, and coming to his opponent, so switching sides basically, Hushai was being disloyal, or Hushai was not portraying loyalty. And again, the word there in the King James is actually kindness. So if you are going to be loyal, it means you need to be showing kindness towards someone else. You need to be looking for the person's good. You need to be having the person's best interest at heart. The next word that is translated as loyal or loyalty is to cleave. So in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 2, again, this is during the time when David was running away from Absalom. It says, "So every man of Israel went up from after David, and following Sheba the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah clave unto their king, from Jordan even to Jerusalem." I love this word so much. So clave, that's the past tense of cleave. That word there, in other translations, it says that the men of Judah were loyal or remained loyal unto their king. And the translation of the word is to cling, to stick. To stick. When you put two things together, whether you're using glue or whatsoever it is, or you're using tape, it's often difficult to disconnect them or to remove them. But it says to cling, to stick, to keep close, to follow closely. Another one says to follow hard. Another one says to pursue closely, right? And so this word, or this aspect or this feature of loyalty means that you do not disconnect yourself from the person. You do not step away from the person, regardless of what is going on. Regardless of what is happening, you follow closely, you follow hard, you pursue closely, right? So if you are going to be loyal to someone, then like we said, you have to have the person's best interest at heart. You have to remain kind, or you have to remain faithful. You have to remain wholly devoted, like we said in the very first word, which was perfect, wholly devoted in your heart to the person. And then, like we've just said, you need to be following them closely. You do not disconnect yourself from someone you claim to be loyal to, or to a belief you claim to be loyal to. The final word we'll look at is love. So in the New Testament, interestingly, even the word love in King James in other translations is also translated as loyalty. So in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, I don't have the verse open here, but I believe it's when Jesus is talking about serving God and mammon, and he's saying that you cannot serve two masters. You will love the one and hate the other, right? That word love there in other translations, it says you will be loyal to the one, okay? And that word there is agapeo, which we just spoke about in our last session, right? And it's about loving dearly. Loving dearly. And so if you want to be loyal, again, going back to cover all the words that we've looked at so far, you need to love the person dearly. Love gives. You need to stick close to the person, or follow hard, pursue closely. You need to be faithful So whether in good times or in bad times, you stay with the person. You don't change. You don't backbite the person. You don't betray the person. And finally, you have to be wholly devoted, completely devoted in your heart. We mentioned that the word perfect is usually used in relation to the heart. So if you want to remain faithful, or if you want to be seen as loyal, then you should be ready to be wholly devoted in your heart. And one thing that all these things tell us, or one thing that I believe is a very strong or a very major feature of loyalty, is trustworthiness. Trustworthiness. If you want to be seen as a loyal person, you need to be able to develop trustworthiness. That's the way that others will be able to see you and judge you as loyal. For those who came later, I mentioned in the beginning that loyalty is not something you can claim for yourself. Someone else needs to see you and say that you are actually a loyal person. So there should be people in your life who can vouch for you that even if anybody will betray me, this person, so and so, will not be part. People should be able to vouch for you that even if anyone will betray them, you won't betray them. Going back to the examples of loyalty that we gave in the beginning, right? We spoke about John, the fact that the fact that Jesus entrusted his mother into the hands of John. I believe it's a very powerful testimony for Jesus to trust that John, it's believed he was the youngest amongst all the disciples, to be able to take care of his mother the same way Jesus would. That's such an amazing testimony. And John also proved his loyalty by taking it on. I mentioned that his mother at that point in time was alive, but then he still took on another mother. He took on another mother according to Jesus' instruction. And so these are the different ways, or at least I think now we've been able to define what loyalty is and what loyalty looks like. And so quickly, I want us to also look at how to be a person of loyalty, or how to be a loyal person. How can we cultivate that virtue of loyalty? Because sometimes there are very little things that you might do or you might engage in, and you might not realize that it's actually eroding your virtue of loyalty. It's actually eroding that virtue of loyalty that you think you might be developing towards someone, towards God most especially, but then generally also in other relationships. So the first thing is that you should be a person of integrity. I believe integrity was also one of the virtues that we looked at a few sessions ago. So you have to be a person of integrity. You have to stand for right always. People should be able to trust that no matter what, you will stand for the truth. It is when they are able to trust that you will stand for the truth that they will know that they can trust you, even when it comes to issues that are related to them. Be that person that even when something happens and we are all unsure of what has happened, and maybe the people around are not really being forthcoming about what happened, we know that once we hear your side of the story, we can take your side of the story because we know that you will not cover anything up. Right? Be that person of integrity. Now, this is important. I think we need to really hammer on this because sometimes some people think that being loyal is just being loyal also means covering up bad behavior, or it means if you're loyal to somebody, means that for example, if you have a friend and your friend injures somebody or fights somebody or steals something, right? We feel like loyalty means you stand by your friend and you don't tell on your friend, or you don't sell your friend out. But if you look at all the different features of loyalty that we have just spoken about, it says that loyalty is having the best interest of the other person at heart. And covering up such self-destructive behavior is not having the best interest of the person at heart. So in being loyal to someone, there are some times when you would have to displease the person, for lack of a better expression, for the person's own good. Okay. And that's where being a person of integrity comes in. Because imagine that if somebody does something that you know is self-destructive, or someone does something that you know clearly is wrong, and instead of even talking to the person and encouraging the person, you need to do something about this, you need to correct it and all of that, you rather join the person or you just help the person cover it up and all of that. You might think that I'm showing loyalty to this person, but one day that the person actually needs help, you will not be the person they'll come to because they've realized that you are not a person of truth. You're not a person who stands for what is right. So if you really want to be a person who is considered loyal, then you need to be willing to stand for what is right always. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 3, it says, "Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart."